Narendra Modi there asking the media to get out.
But the bigger story has just come out. The African Union has been formally admitted to the to G20. G20 is from now G21. That's the big story, Rahul, that's just come out. That formal induction, in a way, of the G20 becoming G21, African Union being embraced. So that's done. That's the first big breaking news. Huge achievement
of India in the G20 to have the African Union admitted as a permanent member, because when history looks back at this day, it will be on the 9th here in Delhi that the African Union was made a permanent member of the G20. Ambassador Luka?
Yes, I would certainly like to pitch in on this, because it's only fitting that it should have happened here in New Delhi, in India, because India was at the forefront of the entire decolonization, anti-racism move, and especially anti-apartheid in South Africa. But equally, it is both symbolic and substantive, because so far it was EU which was a member of what is really a union of nations, G19 plus EU, which made no sense, because leaving out the other part of the world.
So does the name change? Does it become G21 or no?
I think it will,
G7
right?
became G8?
I would presume it will.
It will.
Technically?
It will. But the important point here is EU represented the colonizers. The countries which were the colonies had been left out. So now with African Union coming in, the balance has been struck. There is no longer the haves and have-nots. There's no longer the deprived and the rulers. The world has become more balanced by admission of African Union.
Tangible takeaway, which will leave its imprint on history, the fact that the African Union, and we've spoken exclusively to the president of the African Union, we'll play that out for you in just a moment, but this is something that India has been championing since December last year, when India's G20 presidency began, and it's now come true. It's also the kind of thing that is almost impossible for anyone to say no to. Like, how do you say no to the idea of the African Union in today's day and age becoming a member of the G20?
And I think Ambassador Dogra made an excellent point when he sort of looked at, the historical connections between India and Africa, and they extend at various levels, at commercial levels and certainly political levels. Many of these countries were part of the decolonization project, and India played a huge role. We can go back to Mahatma Gandhi and his and the role that South Africa played in his life. We can look at other leaders from that part of the world, Jomo Kenyatta, Nyerere, all of them were part of Nehruvians. Jawaharlal Nehru's foreign policy is often dissed at various levels, but Nehru and non-alignment, Africa was an integral part of it. Nasser in Egypt, along with Nehru, along with Suharto. It's great to see in a new form, in a new world order, these countries coming together and having their say, and Prime Minister Modi deserves credit for putting Global South on the map.
And an exposition of India's soft power. Remember, a lot of debt coming from China, India opening the doors for the African Union, a warm embrace with the President of the African Union as they are welcome to the G20 high table. Can we just play those images out on our screen right now? What a moment this is. Formally inviting the African Union and saying, we've got this done for you. Everyone raising a warm round of applause as the African Union is given a permanent seat on the G20 high table.
I think this is an important moment, and I think it reflects the fact that the world is recognizing that you can't remain with... This is the new world order. I think this wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. I think this is the new world order where each country's pace and importance is changing. 55 countries.
Also,
African Union, correct me if I'm wrong,
55
is effectively
nations.
55 countries. So in a way,
formed in 1999.
So therefore, Shiv, if you add African Union, add the European Union, you're now talking of more than 100 nations being represented in that room today.
So I think, pending just an announcement that we're awaiting, this becomes the G21. 55 members, part of one entity called the African Union comes in. And also, Rahul, I think we also need to talk about how significant this is in light of China's own separate flex as far as Africa is concerned.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether it is in BRICS, whether it is in other forums, China's entire, push as far as Africa is concerned, through its own financial initiatives and funding of projects has been extremely aggressive. In light of that, This is huge what India has done.
I want to go across and give you a quick excerpt from Azali Assoumani, the president of the African Union, speaking exclusively to India today about his expectations and just how thankful he was to India for helping the African Union achieve its rightful place in the G20 summit. Here he is, Azali Assoumani.
Prime Minister Modi had written to G20 leaders saying that it's extremely important to have the African Union part of the G20. What do you have to say about this, and what role do you see the African nations playing in the G20 as a major player?
D'abord, effectivement, je suis d'accord avec vous, qu'on remercie beaucoup le Premier ministre Modi.
I agree with you that the Prime Minister has played an important role, and I would like to thank him for accepting our membership to the G22 and also for making the advocacy for Africa as a whole. So if tomorrow Africa becomes a full member within the G22, it will be mainly also because of the role that India has played. It will be an honor for us, and it will especially be an honor because this adhesion would have happened in India. We know the effort that the Prime Minister is making. We heard from the IMF that India has become the 5th most powerful country in the world. This is a good example for us because we know how far India has come to become today one of the powerful countries in the world. So Africa will play a big role within the G20. The themes that we are going to discuss tomorrow, One Planet, One Family, One Earth, are important themes, and Africa can bring its contribution to these main themes that we are going to discuss tomorrow.
Ça nous apprend que nous aussi on peut suivre ce chemin-là. Donc, encore une fois, on remercie le Premier ministre pour les efforts qu'il.
I want to go across to Geeta Mohan, our Foreign Affairs Editor. The African Union being invited to the G20 high table, does that mean the G20 then formally gets rechristened the G21, or does it just stay the G20 with the African Union joining in?
Well, the number will have to change given the fact that if we're talking about representation, Rahul, the 20th member state or member of the grouping is European Union. So if African Union joins, then it'll have to be G21. So again, we'll have to see what the formal announcement at the end of the summit is going to look like. From next year, in all probability, we'll be saying the G21 rather than G20. If you go by logic, it'll have to be G21.
And also, Geeta, does that mean, in a way, can we now conclusively say also that you've got the first major achievement of what has happened at G20 this year, that irrespective of what happens tomorrow in terms of declarations, African Union becoming part of the G20 will be remembered as one of the major contributions of what has happened in Delhi. And India will rightfully stake claim to having played a major role in that.
Absolutely. This is an initiative, a proposal from India and by India, Rajdeep. There is no other a country that can take credit for such a huge achievement, irrespective of what happens at the end of the 2-day summit in terms of whether there's going to be joint communique or not. Within that joint communique, there is consensus on one very important inclusion. 55-member bloc of the African Union, Rajdeep, being included in the G20 certainly makes for a huge grand success for India and for the global community, where most of the countries are looking at emerging economies, are looking to Africa, investing in Africa, and looking at making Africa not just in terms of development, but also a manufacturing hub. They have the land, they have the space, and in all that we're seeing a lot of interest in Africa today. Strategically also speaking, the African African continent, some of the countries are very important, not just to India, but also to China, to the United States of America, Europe as a whole. So this is indeed a huge achievement. Having their voice is also in many ways putting forth voice of the global south, and G20 becoming more representative of the new world order, a changed world order. We will not see much of that, this kind of inclusion, inclusivity in structures where countries like India, Rajdeep, don't really have a say. Look at how India is struggling with UN reforms. Look at how India has been struggling with expansion of the UNSC. But at the G20, India has made it happen. And African Union being included is indeed a huge achievement.